Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of watery vibes, music that makes you think of water, rain, lakes, rivers, oceans, pools, what have you. Today, we're going to be checking out the group The Ruins of Beverast, which we have heard in the past, and they've been a rough band for me personally. But I have been told that this may be one of the most Bryan songs of their catalog. The one that I may enjoy the most out of it. The track is called Tempelschlaf, which is German for temple sleep. Let's dive into it, see where the ruins are taking us today. Nice little 4/4 here. Lots of reverb on the percussion. Big drums right here in the center, but we still have all of the reverb on the sides. Oh! We have the clean vocals in here, which are interesting, but man, tons of groove as well. Wild melody here. I think there's still a heavy use of reverb out here, particularly on the cymbals. Interesting rhythmic patterns on the drums. Rigid rhythmic pattern on the drums. did anticipate the groove a little bit early. They wanted to lead into that, but the halftime deal, man, that was the right time for it. The bouncing notes in the background is interesting, especially against the core guitar riff. Drier cymbals over here that I think are working better. We're back to the heavy delay of the intro. Yeah, the outskirts where the delay is happening is interesting because it's very treble EQ'd. Just those two notes again.
I can see the void in your eyes that withered all our delight. Answer me, grant me endless ecstasy. Have me bathe in your teary eyes and watch me fall.
Interesting note choices on the main melody here. Oh, that bends. There are certainly elements of this track that I think work better for me than most of the other Ruins of Beverast tracks that we've checked out in the past. But it's still not my cup of tea. I think one of the first things that makes this difficult for me to enjoy and is a key element of it, and I think it has artistic merits. Hopefully the lyrics might line up a little bit with this, but there's a lot of harmonic friction in here. Not specifically with any specific chord. I think that most of the chords played throughout this, and usually we're just in one chord for an elongated amount of time. Sometimes we will have a home and a tension, when we kind of bounce back and forth between tension and resolution there. But I don't think there are many sections in here where we have a more traditional 4 or certainly not any 8-bar chords or 8-chord progressions. 1 or 2 seems to be the general idea for this track right here. And so a lot of it ends up feeling very stationary. But when we look at the harmonic concept, not necessarily the chord itself, but the notes that are played alongside these chords, we're going to find a lot of a lack of strong harmonic identity. I don't think it's necessarily frictional in the fact that it's dissonant. Are there dissonant parts in here? Absolutely. Is it dissonant as a quality, though? I don't think it ever leans enough in that direction for me to say that this is a dissonant track. But there's certainly several places where the lead melody or some ornamental melodic ostinato will present itself with atonality, specifically choosing notes outside of the key chord that we're working within. We heard a lot of this in the final solo, but there was a place during the penultimate vocal part where I brought up that they had some interesting note choices in that melody. The 2 notes bouncing back and forth that cropped up a couple of times. One of those notes is very frictional against the rest of the chord. This wasn't anything that was in one specific part of the track. This was a consistent flavor within the song. The chords being played by the rhythm guitar that create the foundation of this track are fairly muted. There's just not a lot of color or flavor to them. We're probably looking at triads at best, most likely dyads. They present a general structure, but there's not a lot of musical information there to really figure out what key we're in, what kind of chords we're dealing with. It's really up to the melody to fill in the blanks, and generally the melody points in one direction. I'd say a majority of the time, over 50%, but not an incredibly dominant amount like 80 or 90% of it. Most songs are going to have 100% cohesion, where the filled in notes are all going to be pointing towards the same key. What we get here is generally pointing towards a key, but also every once in a while just dipping away from that, taking some notes from a different key entirely. And it creates a song that feels like it doesn't have a harmonic core. It doesn't really have a harmonic heart to it. In a lot of places that ended up to me feeling a bit atonal, not really having a core harmonic identity. Sometimes this created friction, heavy dissonance. Other times it just created a song with a very wide palette of colors, if you will. If a painting has just 5 or 6 hues to it, it has a general vibe. But when you want to add 100 different hues, well, it's going to be incredibly vibrant now, but lacking a specific identity. And this is a track that has 100 hues. It is very vibrant, it's colorful, it's harmonically plentiful. But a lot of music simply isn't built that way. It's very difficult to tell a story through that unless your story is lacking a core. So I'm kind of curious how this is going to present itself in the lyrical themes, though I vaguely remember that this is just something that Ruins of Beverast does in all of their music anyways, so it could just be their style more so than something they're purposefully trying to say with their art. From that perspective, some places it's kind of nice. You know, I come from a jazz background, playing with notes outside of your key, coloring outside the lines a little bit. It's par for the course. I'm used to it. I think that it can be used really well. Here, I think it's used a bit, maybe a bit recklessly. It ends up, again, kind of removing identity from the track rather than expanding identity. By having too much, it actually says nothing, or it says very little. This could be something that changes with repeat listens, as pretty common with anything that's a bit more on the experimental side, anything that pushes away from common use of musical tools. Sometimes you just have to understand that they're using their own adaptation, their own language, and you've got to take some time to learn their language to understand what they're trying to say. But I did find several cases in here where I thought I understood what it was trying to tell me, and then it would just veer off into a different direction and say something else entirely. And when you pair that with what they said prior and what they chose to say afterwards, it just kind of becomes a cluttered mess of notes rather than a theme being explored. And I found that happened more often than not, specifically in the melodic components. When I look at the chord progressions, when I look at the rhythmic devices, all of these are generally focused. It's really the melodic note choices throughout that tend to honestly be a bit more experimental. Everything else is more traditional, I'd say. I find it's interesting just how much of an outlier the melodic part is compared to the rhythmic and harmonic side of things. Speaking on the rhythmic side of things, this is a rather rigid track. A lot of the times we are working with quarter notes on every beat. We are working with every other beat, or we are working with 2 to 4 times per beat. Either way, it's usually a consistent, rigid rhythm. There were 2 places in here where we played around with syncopation a little bit. I thought the second or third section of this track, somewhere around the 2.5-minute mark, was super groovy. I really enjoyed that. I thought that was a cool contrast. We never really returned to that though. We had a little bit of syncopation towards the end when we introduced the triplet feel and contrasted that against a more typical quarter note vibe. That was a nice little metric modulation there. Simple, but still a nice change of pace. But aside from those 2 moments, a lot of the drum work in here ends up being just rigid. What is the pattern for this section? Just keep playing the pattern. No syncopation against it. Every note is the same length as the ones around it. It makes sense, I suppose. This is very doomy. Doom can be syncopated, but I find it often isn't, which helps increase the weight of it. Syncopation tends to make things lighter and more dexterous. Rigidity makes things heavier and more concentrated. That's certainly what you would want for doom metal. It works. But I don't know, like, objectively, yeah, exactly what you want to do. Subjectively, dang, after getting that groove 2 minutes in, I was really anticipating that again. I thought it was incredible contrast. I hope that maybe lyrically we explore something there that might allude to why we needed to loosen up for a brief moment and never return to that again. But I did find it was a bit of a tease for me personally, and not something I would expect going on a repeat listen, which might help then. But something that I felt, again, a little teased on. I was hoping that would have come back at some point in time here. And harmonically, we already talked about the simplicity of that 1 to 2 chord progressions throughout most of this. The vocals, I think, are interesting. I can't remember the vocalist on the previous tracks that we've checked out from this group. I was expecting growls. That's what I had in my mind. The cleans all the way through surprised me, but it could be that while I might remember some of the vibes from previous Ruins tracks, I've forgotten the specific timbres of some of the instruments, and I've just kind of in my mind lumped it into a doom metal band, which they are, but maybe I'm just generalizing their vocal sound, and maybe they don't do growls often. Regardless, the cleans here surprised me. I think they are generally well done. I do like the width of them, and there is an interesting, almost campy seriousness to them. I don't know if the campiness is something I'm injecting with my own biases and relationships to this sound itself, or if they're actually injecting that in there and want that to be purposeful. But there's something about the way he's delivering this sound, projecting from the back of the mouth, getting that really wide open tone, the wide vibrato on it. It almost feels overdone in some ways, and maybe it's just because this is doom metal, which is already kind of an over-the-top style of music, and the vocal delivery feels a bit over the top, and the theatricality of both sides is sort of amplifying, kind of cross the line into ridiculousness or absurdity, which comes off a bit comical to me. I'm not going to say that this is a funny song, but I think the absurdity of everything compounding on each other is something that I felt throughout parts of it and colored some of my experience. But again, not enough that I ended up laughing through this or anything. I don't read it as a comedy or a parody track at all. I do believe it is supposed to be done seriously, but it still feels a little pastiche to me at times. But I do think that the vocal delivery is well done. It is a controlled vibrato. It is a controlled placement of the sound. It is a nice controlled sound in general, really sticking to a chest sound throughout, a comfortable vocal range. And all of this, I think, kind of adds to the weight of the doominess of all of it, as wide, lowered sounds tend to do, which is why I think growling and doom metal tend to work really well together. They complement the weight. But there were some pitched things in here that I wasn't too keen on. There was a couple of vocal runs that instead of picking specific notes to hit, they just kind of stumbled from one note to another. Part of this leans into the atonality of everything, but I also have to wonder if some of it has anything to do with, I don't know, a lack of precision in the vocal technique itself. Some notes felt fine. Metal is generally in a style of music where you can have intonation problems and not really sound wrong. Again, because there's so little definition to the chordal information in a lot of metal that you can be a little looser with your note precision on any instrument, but vocals included. So I don't think it's too big of an issue, but it is something I picked up on a couple of times, that while most of the notes feel like they were exactly what was designed to be sung there, some of the runs felt a bit loose in its melodic definition. If it was more consistent, I'd say it was intentional. It only happened like one or two times, made it feel like flubs that they ended up keeping in for one reason or another. Regardless, I do think the vocals work well with this style, and all of that comes together very neatly. But there is the general production on everything. The vocals are also widened and delayed and reverbed at times. And this delay plus reverb combo create some sections of this track that feel like rhythmically they want to fall apart. Particularly, there was one case around 4 minutes into the track. We had some heavy cymbal off on the right, and we would get the hit and the delay and the reverb, and of course, the cymbal shimmers. It continues to make sound after you've hit it already. Most of the tom and snare work, I think, worked fine with this delay and reverb combo, but the cymbals did not, and it created a lot of muddiness in the rhythmic element of this track, and it was a tough time falling into any of that. Could be artistic direction, losing a track of time, feeling lost within an idea, but nothing else really leaned into this. It was specifically just this one part of the drum kit, which doesn't necessarily negate that reading, but it does make it more difficult for me to, with full emphasis, say that I believe that's the intended reading, because it's such a small part of this track overall, although it does dominate my experience with that moment. There's some delay and reverb that happens on the guitars as well that kind of get a little muddy. I think it was just generally overused in places. There were some sections where I thought it worked really well and added to this feeling of being in a cave or being underwater, this element of being surrounded on all sides, unable to escape from this place. But there's just as many places in here where the effect ended up delivering a different experience than that, one that was a bit more disruptive to the listening experience than immersive in it. And it's those situations that I think it should have been maybe dialed back a little bit, not necessarily disabled completely, though there were sections where we just got rid of it completely, and I thought those sections were well done too. It did create a nice atmospheric contrast across this track. All in all, I've been trying to figure out what this song is trying to say, though. It is heavy, it is moody, it is claustrophobic in a lot of ways, but it's also tough to pin down harmonically, emotionally, melodically, and sometimes even rhythmically, to the point that it at times feels like one long single concept, just 9 minutes of one idea, and then I'll think about something else that happened and I'll remember, oh snap, all these different sections were, they had their own identities. Maybe this is a long journey of sorts that has similar overtones, but even then, I'm not really sure what the journey was that I went on. As usual, this is very subjective, and I'm coming at it from just a single listen. My opinions and understanding of this track could change with repeat listens, but off of this first one, I just found that I was a bit lost within it more often than not, and when I found something that spoke to me, it was often accompanied with something that took me out of the experience as well. Bit of a, I don't know, 50-50 on this one. Some cool moments, some that I wasn't too keen about. And I feel like that's just me and Ruins of Beverast in general. Let me hit some lyrics on this one, and we're going to wrap this one up. All right, here's something really wild. This track is just verse, chorus, at least as far as the lyrics are concerned. There's certainly a ton of instrumental parts in here, but I did not expect the lyrics to be so limited, might be the word. There's just not a lot of them. However, both choruses are slightly different. We get a little change to the back half of it in order to wrap the song up in a different direction than we were in the middle of the track, which I like a lot. It allows the words to have finality despite reaching a point of familiarity. Usually, tracks will end on a chorus, which is no different than any of the other choruses we've heard, and it feels cyclical. It's why I typically lean towards a more linear finale for music. You can certainly bring choruses back, but choruses are not a strong finale unless your themes are about cycles. If your theme is about growth in any way, maybe you started from a low point and broke out of that and became stronger, coming back to a chorus that talks about being at that low point again seems kind of weird, even if musically you're looking at something larger and more adventurous. So I like this sort of midpoint where you still have your A-B idea. You still get to finish the track on your chorus, but lyrically we're changing the words to represent the journey that the story went through. I'm a big fan of that. Now the beginning says, kissing the temple floor, I taste the salt of night, dissolve me forever. Night in here is really important. A lot of this track is about light versus night. Now, I'm not sure why the salt of the night would dissolve them, but maybe it's an idea of becoming one with the night. It is called Tempelschlaf after all. There's also a feeling of general, well, a search for enlightenment is in here. The chorus says, God of light, some strange darkness murmurs here, but I am hidden well. God of light, will you expel these doubts from me? So they want to be more knowledgeable, maybe more understanding of something. The night is a lack of information, as night typically is, and light being enlightenment is knowledge. They have these doubts, they want them removed, and they think the light can do that. We'll actually see a change, as I mentioned in the second chorus. We have the first part again, God of light, strange darkness is here, but I'm hidden well. It says, Goddess of night, lock me inside these blood-stained chambers, never to return into the light. Something has caused them to lose trust in what light can be or do for them, and they would rather just be stuck in ignorance, in the darkness, for the rest of time. Now, what happens between these two choruses doesn't really answer my question of what happened, why our protagonist would have this change of heart. It's only 6 lines, I'll read them all for you. Serpent voices breathing harm into me. I can tell from the trembling of the temple walls. End my sleep, end the twisted ecstasy. I can see the void in your eyes that withered all of our delight. Answer me, grant me endless ecstasy. Have me bathe in your teary eyes and wash me for the purest night. The only thing I can think is that coming off of the chorus, this might be referring to the God of light. That the God of light is a serpent voice, a liar, someone who has tricked our narrator. The serpent voice is breathing harm into me. But the thing is that this section, this verse, is like 3 minutes displaced from the previous chorus. There's been so much time that's gone past that I can't really read them together that way. Maybe they are intended to be read that way, but it doesn't really say who is the one that he feels has been lying to him. But he does say, end my sleep, which I would assume is something the god of light would do, as the goddess of night would induce sleep. Typically, anyways, nighttime is when we rest. So I don't know. It also says I can see the void in your eyes, which void I would once again attribute to the goddess of night more than the god of light. But then at the end it says, bathe me in your eyes and wash me for the purest night. It does seem that they have gone towards the goddess of night's side, finding that to be the place where they should reside rather than light. But I just don't understand how they got there. 4 lines in here that are supposed to explain everything, they carry so much narrative weight, and somehow I'm lost within this. The feeling of being lost, though, and wanting answers, wanting enlightenment, wanting to know things to help you understand elements, I mean, that's kind of what my whole reaction was about. That some of the parts of this track make sense to me, but just as many had me questioning the track itself, what it was trying to say, where we were going, what it was doing. If nothing else, I found myself in a very similar situation as our protagonist narrator here, and it's always really cool to experience that same storyline, that same emotional element as the music suggests and the lyrics tell. Having that synergy with the lyrical side of things is very neat, and I'm always going to give artistic props for that. With that said, these are my thoughts on Tempelschlaf by the Ruins of Beverast. Let me know what you thought of this, if there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on. If you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this, throw that down into the comments section along with anything else you'd like to add to the conversation. Above that, in the description box, is a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening. whenever you choose to watch my videos.